Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Underground. This is the Intel update for November 24th through the 30th, 2024. So let's get right to it. Continuing the trend from last week, I'm going to spend all of today talking about international events. Not that there haven't been events in the United States worth covering. There certainly have been. It's just I've been personally more focused on international kind of mutterings, rumors, atmospherics, just the kind of general feel. Because, as we all know, the American election has, transpired, and now we're just waiting for Inauguration Day, and because of that, very, very significant international developments are underway. This, of course, happens every 4 years, but this year it's been quite interesting to follow some of the more diplomatic sort of things that have been going on around the world. So just as a blanket disclaimer to kind of head off any sort of Reddit tier, well, actually kind of arguments, today I'm going to be talking a lot of opinion, a lot of speculation, a lot of unconfirmed stuff, a lot of more discussion type content. So again, we are in the era of unknowns in terms of what nations are willing to do, and I think we're finding out a lot when it comes to especially the international stuff that the way things are in the world is not necessarily the way that they have been portrayed to the United States, American population. So again, especially when we get to the Middle East, a lot of people are finding out that, well, the situation that we have been fed, the stories that we have been kind of led to believe are true, might not necessarily be the most accurate way of painting the picture. But again, we'll get to that. Just wanted to let everyone know it's going to be a little contentious when it comes to some of these events because we just don't know. The concept of truth in society is very much debatable by a lot of people these days, and very few people are willing to try to come at things from a neutral perspective. So that makes it very, very hard to kind of understand what's really going on. So all of that out of the way. Hopefully that will kind of quell any sort of dissent here. But anyway, let's start with Northern Europe and talk about the recent cable cutting incident. So, suspect number one is the Chinese merchant vessel Yipeng 3. This is a bulk cargo carrier vessel that is, of course, Chinese flagged and is the lead suspect in the recent cable cutting incidents in the Baltic Sea. So for those of you who have not been following this incident, two submarine cables or undersea cables were cut in the Baltic Sea a couple of weeks ago, and the investigation has been ongoing as to who might have been the culprit. Last week we talked about how there was kind of a lot of details that didn't really add up in terms of an anchor dragging scenario. Generally speaking, the things that were suspicious to me were the timing of the incidents. They occurred many, many hours apart, according to the companies themselves, and also the location where the cables were cut. They were allegedly cut upwards of 100 miles away from each other. There have been a lot of media groups writing about this topic, but a lot of the reporting is circular, meaning that one media group comes out with a report or with some sort of journalistic effort, and then a bunch of other subsidiaries or affiliates copy that report and just put it out again. So you don't really have multiple sources, you just have that one. In any case, I haven't seen any solid reporting coming out that gives us a whole lot of details from either the companies or the nation of Sweden or the nation of Denmark, which is also sort of one of the leading partners of the investigation. However, one detail is kind of adds a little bit of credence to what I was talking about last week, which is that it's suspicious that the cables were cut at different parts, but yet they were also cut at different times. So that didn't make a whole lot of sense. Well, now the leading story is, or at least the theory that the media is going with, is that this ship, the Yipeng 3, drug her anchor for over 100 miles and just scraped the ocean floor with her anchor for a very long period of time. So yeah, ship dragging her anchor for over 100 miles is fairly indicative of a very intentional act. Is it true? No one really knows. Of course, the Chinese government has not been very helpful. The Russian Navy also sent a ship into the area to kind of make a little bit of naval power projection. But in any case, the investigation's basically concluded. The Danes briefly quasi-detained the vessel in port. But again, the investigation, the vessel did not cooperate. China did not cooperate either, and they just had to let the vessel go. I don't know why they didn't just seize the ship, and just keep it as kind of like a, act of war sort of thing. But anyway, I guess the Danes are probably not willing to poke China too hard, considering that, of course, Chinese vessels are instrumental to trade in the region. So yeah, it seems like our lead suspect is kind of fleeing the scene, so to speak. But either way, anchor dragging, was it an anchor dragging incident? I don't know. There haven't been a lot of details released on it. It still could be a Russian submarine, like I originally thought. It still could be that. It still could be an American submarine, for all we know. The Baltic Sea is decently shallow, so a few different nations have that capability to go down into those waters. So it's not really that big of a deal. So yeah, not a whole lot of details on this one. We're just going to have to kind of be okay with understanding that we're not going to know the full story on this. So let's move on down to Western Europe at large. And again, this is in terms of speculation land. We're still kind of there. I think a lot of people are okay with that because we're trying to figure out, essentially, we're trying to get to the bottom of the story of how close are we to a very, very widespread conflict breaking out throughout Europe that's not just involving Ukraine. To that, I say it's still pretty unlikely, but that's just my personal opinion. Again, like we're so far off of the manual with regards to what should have happened, what has happened. So we're just kind of going on gut assessments at this point with regards to a lot of these conflicts. And we see that in terms of what nations are trying to do civil defense-wise. Like I wrote earlier this week in The Wire, Germany has sort of made these efforts as well. In terms of they're trying to examine the feasibility of turning a lot of their metro stations and underground subway stations into bomb shelters or air raid shelters. But I'll get to that in a moment, because I think that when it comes to a lot of these nations, Germany, Sweden, Finland, a lot of these countries trying to revamp and revitalize their civil defense practices, I think that there's a little bit of an ulterior motive there, which is fairly obvious. I mean, of course there's an ulterior motive to pretty much everything in the field of international relations and politics. But I think that there's one canary in the coal mine that kind of lets us know that NATO might not be very serious about some of these things. And to kind of set the stage for that idea, two incidents occurred this week that really were kind of interesting, at least as far as I'm concerned, with regards to being an indicator for how serious things really are. One of them was in Sweden. One of their nuclear reactors was scheduled to have a planned maintenance period. They're going to go ahead and cancel that so that they can keep that reactor online permanently running through 2026. For those of you who might not be aware of how nuclear reactors work, this is fairly common, or at least the concern with shutting the reactor down and starting it back up is there because in order to take a reactor completely and utterly offline, it takes months to restart it sometimes. It takes months to shut down, months to bring back online. Now, in an emergency, of course, the reactor can be shut down instantly. However, it breaks a lot of things in terms of the longevity of some of the equipment. I know nuclear engineers are probably going to disagree with that, but there's a lot to be said for slowly spinning down a reactor versus shutting it down immediately. Another situation is very interesting to me in terms of what NATO is kind of thinking and trying to work toward is in the United Kingdom. As many of you have probably seen by now, Prime Minister Starmer has radically changed his position on immigration. And in a televised address or speech, he stated that this was by design. This did not happen by accident. So you can read the full speech to get the full context of what he's saying, but the implications of that are very interesting because essentially the Prime Minister, who's an extreme far left politician, extreme far left, at least by American standards, extreme far left, complete open borders, complete world citizenship kind of guy, now has completely flipped the script and completely gone the exact opposite way. And to be honest, some of his remarks so far on immigration have been essentially, in my opinion, against British law. I mean, people have been locked up and are currently sitting in jail in the United Kingdom for saying, immigration is probably not a super great idea. And he comes out and says that this is not working at all and we must change this. Do you see the situation with regards to the reality and the British legal system is completely demolished, right? So that's a very interesting aspect that I'm kind of interested in. And both of these things, this Swedish reactor and the Prime Minister's remarks in the United Kingdom, kind of lead me to essentially being able to theorize some of the indications and warnings. Essentially, I'm looking at a bunch of canaries and some coal mines here, and I think that a lot of the civil defense fear-mongering, stoking kind of World War III, oh my gosh, nuclear Armageddon kind of talk in Europe over the past few weeks is really misplaced. And here's why. I think that if Germany was serious about civil defense, they would be doing the things like the proper things, the things that you would expect a nation to do if they're trying to protect their citizenry, right? Produce pamphlets, re-examine critical infrastructure, do things like that. But Germany is also completely going the opposite way with regards to energy. They're focusing on pamphlets, and they're not focusing on the one thing that Russia is going to have, a really strong grip on, which is energy. All of this may seem to be very, very unrelated. So I'll try to kind of bring this home under one idea. I'm afraid I'm not as articulate this week as I would hope to have been, but in terms of, you've got nations around Europe that are preparing for World War III. At least it seems like they are, doesn't it? They're doing pamphlets, they're examining their metro systems, they're talking about, draft ages, they're talking about civil conscription. They're doing all of these things that you would, assume that a government would do if they are preparing to go towards a World War situation in Europe, or a very large conflict, if nothing else, in Europe. But on the other hand, they're doing things that make absolutely zero sense. So, for instance, just to show you the perspective that I'm kind of looking at things from, Admiral Rob Bauer did a talk a few days ago, where in which I tried to explain it in a rather long wire report, but essentially people were very concerned that basically the commander of military forces in NATO was talking about potentially doing a first strike on Russia. Again, that's not what he said. People were taking his words out of context, and they omitted the next sentence, in which he very clearly stated that NATO will not strike Russia first. We will have to wait, and we will have to take the first blow first, and then we can strike Russia with long-range munitions. That's what he was talking about, and I hope that my very delicate wording in that wire report kind of conveyed that. But anyway, people were kind of focusing on that part, but they were completely omitting the other things that he said that were absolutely ridiculous. So again, this is all just atmospherics. It's all opinion. It's all speculative. It's all subjective, very subjective. All this stuff is very subjective. However, we have to really go on what NATO's leadership, says. So, don't get mad at me, get mad at, NATO's military leadership. And one of the things that was kind of interesting to me is that basically in the same breath as saying we need to be militarily capable of taking on Russia because war is coming and it's, in many ways, it's already here. But in the same breath, you also say clean energy is the future. Wind turbines and solar panels are going to help us out during a war. I mean, on an individual person or soldier level, yeah, a little solar panel to help, offset, the grid being down is very crucial. But this is Europe. Solar in Europe just doesn't work. I mean, it just doesn't. I mean, how many months of the year do Germany's solar panels stay covered with snow? I mean, this has caused nationwide blackouts before. And you're going to tell me that if Mother Nature can take out your energy source, you don't want to take it into a combat situation where Russia can do so much more damage. One cluster munition could black out your country with solar panels. So either way, again, this is all very subjective, but I find it to be very, very odd that you've got countries like Germany who are trying to stoke fear in their population, saying, oh my gosh, you may have to shelter in a metro station so that Putin's bombs don't get you. But somehow those wind turbines and those solar panels will be perfectly fine because clean energy is the future. Do you see how irritating this can be? Because if you really wanted to honestly, solidly protect your nation in terms of energy, in terms of just anything, energy is one of the things you're going to need. If half your population freezes to death due to just the weather and not any sort of military action, how good is that going to be? It's not going to be very good at all, right? So places like Germany, Sweden, Finland, doing all these civil defense things, but they're not looking at energy. They're not looking at communications, right? They're not looking at these sorts of things. Tells me they're not really serious in terms of what they need to be thinking about. And perhaps more nefariously, what if they are? That's the worst thought. What if they are serious? What if they genuinely, utterly, and truly, wholeheartedly believe that they will be at war within a couple of years, and they still think solar panels and wind turbines are going to help them out? I don't have enough time in the day to explain how dumb of an idea that is. But anyway, hopefully many of you can see that in war, lives are measured in diesel. Lives are measured in oil. And that's how wars are fought, logistics, right? So in terms of what a nation is doing on the national front with regards to civil defense, we can look at things and say, well, this is an interesting effort. It's good that this country is taking the effort to try to prepare their citizens for a contingent situation. We can look at it through that lens, but I look at it through an additional lens, which is save your pamphlets, bro. Don't mail me a pamphlet. Fix your nuclear reactors. Fix your wind turbines, fix your solar panels, and make your energy source more resilient. Because if China can take your national cell phone grid offline because they don't like the fact that you're snooping around one of their ships that dragged an anchor over a cable, do you see where we're going with this? Like maybe we should not so much focus on the pamphlets, but focus on the energy needs, which are completely unnoticed by a lot of people. So yeah, I know, kind of a ranty off-topic way to look at things, I guess, but it just seems to me like if we're trying to not fearmonger, if we're trying to avoid fear-mongering, but we're also trying to accurately assess the threat, we're trying to do some risk management. The risk management chart on all of this, all of these charts and graphs, I've looked at it a billion different ways, and Europe is just not serious. They're not serious about the potential for war. They're trying to make it look like they're serious by printing out some really pretty pamphlets, but they're not really investing in a lot of the things that you would expect them to invest in with regards to national defense and national security. So I don't know. That may change. And of course, we always have to remember, we are looking at things through a soda straw, right? So we can't necessarily see a lot of the efforts that nations are undertaking. If a nation is secretly building a grand communications network, we would still find out about that because there are just indicators everywhere. But anyway, you see what I'm trying to say. A lot of nations are probably doing secret preparedness items with regards to at least keeping their elites safe. In terms of a large conflict, but in terms of the actual citizenry itself and being very serious about their nation, it just doesn't seem like they're preparing in the ways that I would have expected them to. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of put that out there as a way of simmering things down, because a lot of people are terrified right now that World War III is like days away. I don't think so, but again, the overall idea is that we would always stumble into something like this, or that World War III would go hot by a mistake, not an intentional act or an intentional aggression. It was always going to be a misunderstanding that results in something bad happening. But anyway, I think we've gotten far enough off topic on that. Let's go ahead and move over to the Middle East, where we can get ourselves into even more trouble. So, two big developments this week in the Middle East. For one, the Lebanon ceasefire. And I say ceasefire in gigantic air quotes because it's a typical Middle Eastern ceasefire where basically it's not really a ceasefire. Everyone's still shooting at each other. So it's just they're shooting at each other with less intensity, which, like I wrote yesterday, it might be the best we can hope for. Israel has violated the ceasefire very clearly by striking targets in Lebanon. Hezbollah has also violated the ceasefire by striking Israeli targets with couple of tanks with some ATGMs or something like that. Hard to say. That's why the situation gets a little bit skewed, because we can very clearly see an Israeli airstrike, right? Because, well, they use very large munitions, don't they? So we can very clearly see, well, who dropped that bomb? Is it Hezbollah, who have no aircraft, or is it Israel? Well, we clearly know that an aerial bomb was dropped, so, okay, clearly Israel violated the ceasefire. But was that before or after Hezbollah did something on the ground that we can't see? Again, I don't want to take up for any side in this, but I can scroll Telegram and find endless footage of Israeli bombs landing in Lebanon after the ceasefire. But I can't really find that many videos of Hezbollah targeting Israel. But again, it's an intelligence gap. I just don't have that information. It probably is happening, but I can't say for sure. All I can say for sure is bombs have landed in Lebanon after the ceasefire. So again, the war in the Middle East is really just opinion-based anyway, so whoever's going to pick a side, just pick your side. But anyway, the more interesting thing that has happened this week has been in Syria. So for now, in Lebanon, things are... I'm not going to say the ceasefire's holding, because technically it isn't. Both sides are still shooting at each other. They're just shooting at each other with less intensity. So is that a ceasefire? I don't know. It's up for you to decide, I guess. But either way, let's move over to Syria, where some rather significant developments are underway that may have some implications for the United States in the future. So, with regards to Syria, I know not a lot of people care about Syria. Trust me, there will be a why should you care sort of situation at the end here. I'll explain. But just for the record, I wanted to show this chart. This chart outlines a lot of the relationships and sort of alliances and frenemy sort of situations that are kind of going on with regards to the conflict with ISIS. Now, as we can see here, ISIS at the very center. Basically, everybody hated ISIS for a period of time. So this is an older chart. This is an older chart of alliances and sort of relationships. It's not this way anymore. This is kind of like 2015, 2016 time frame of how the Syrian war kind of worked out. Now, as Donald Trump likes to bring up, ISIS was defeated. Well, in the Middle East, you don't really ever defeat an enemy, right? They just change flags. So ISIS's population, the population of human beings on the earth that were waving the ISIS flag and calling themselves Islamic State, that did dwindle down to basically zero at one point. But they just took off their patches and took down their flags, and they joined another group. Well, over the past few years, over the past 4 or 5 years or so, they've made a resurgence in terms of popularity. Now, in terms of being an army, they're not back on the same stage that they were. For the longest time, ISIS was, they were the hot group in town to join. Not so much anymore, but you do see ISIS flags being around and a lot of morale patches on people's gear, like plate carriers and whatnot. But we'll get to that in just a moment. In any case, just kind of ignore the ISIS part in the middle for now, and you can see all of the different power players that are at some way a factor in this conflict. So, let's move on to what has happened over the past 48 hours. Well, in short, one of the major Western-backed proxy groups that has kind of morphed itself from an offshoot of Al-Qaeda has essentially taken control of a large chunk of Aleppo, a major city in northwestern Syria. Again, Damascus is the capital. Aleppo is, well, it depends on how you view the population tables, but at one time Aleppo was the biggest city in the country. Hard to say if it's that way now, but it's a very large city still, and now the fighting is kicked off. For those who are kind of wondering, why are we still talking about Syria? Didn't the Syrian civil war end in 2020? Effectively, sort of. There was a very tenuous ceasefire that was brokered by Turkey and Russia to kind of let the front lines kind of stay where they were, and basically everybody sit down for a minute and just stop shooting each other. That lasted for a couple of years, and then the fighting kicked up again, and now it's reached, again, another period of intensity. So Vladimir Putin has formally accused Turkey of helping this faction violate the ceasefire, and all of this has happened over the past 2 days. Again, the fighting has been going on or building for the past 3 or 4 months. I don't think anybody was ever really expecting it to go anywhere, but now they've sort of made a quick run for Aleppo and kind of caught the Syrian army off guard. Now, is this indicative of a major offensive? I would say yes, but again, that's opinion. This could just be a skirmish of a few hundred or even maybe a few thousand soldiers and that are trying to take Aleppo. Can they hold Aleppo? I don't know. Time will tell. Like I said, this is a current event. This is happening as I am recording this briefing right now. So it's hard to say, will they just punch into Aleppo, get some pictures of themselves, chilling on the governor's couch like we've already seen, and then retreat in a couple of days so they don't lose their fighting force? I don't know. It's hard to say. I can tell you that they've captured quite a bit of Aleppo. They've captured some regions that they didn't capture even at the height of the fighting a few years ago. But again, we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Let's talk broad brush here. Let's talk very broadly here about who's kind of at play here. Well, let's talk firstly about the major nations involved. On the west, on the western-backed side, you have the United States and Israel. And on the east, you have Russia, along with Iran, Iraq, and of course, Syria, the Syrian government, Bashar al-Assad, right? So these are the two main factions at play. Underneath these factions, we have a lot going on. So starting with the east, this is the most simple. Russia is backing the government of Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian army, as we call them, right? The proper Syrian governmental army, along with some varying factions and logistics, mostly from places like Iran and Iraq. Those relationships have been strained at times, but that's generally how it's worked out. Now, the more interesting side, the kind of more complex, hard to figure out side, which is intentional, I think, we have a lot of Western-backed proxies. Right now, the new kids in town, or rather the hot kids on the block at the moment, are what we call HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Now, these guys, they are an offshoot, debatably, they're an offshoot of the al-Nusra Front, which in itself is a wing of al-Qaeda. So they've tried to rebrand themselves a couple of times over the years to make themselves more palatable to the West, but again, this is very, very, very contentious here to suggest the United States is funding terrorists, or what we would consider to be terrorists, in Syria. However, in my opinion, again, this is absolutely happening. And this has been a contentious topic for about 15 years now in Congress. Some congressman finds out, wait a minute, why is that guy wearing an ISIS patch on his uniform? And we're giving him money? Do you see how this has become kind of a thing? Essentially, the United States is flinging wads of cash at anyone who hates Bashar al-Assad. That's how the Syrian war has basically gone. Russia is doing everything they can to prop up Bashar al-Assad. That's essentially the conflict in a nutshell. Another complicating factor, which is where the United States kind of comes into this and why this may start to matter a little bit, is Turkey. Now, Turkey is what we might consider to be a professional fence sitter. Turkey is a very interesting nation because they are a member of NATO, so remember that, they're a member of NATO, but they're not really a NATO ally, they're not really friendly. We made Turkey a NATO ally so that we could put Patriot missiles there to kind of tick off Russia a long time ago, but you see how this is just a complicated web of international relations nobody really cares about. I did put Turkey here as a proxy of the United States because they kind of are, they kind of aren't. It's hard to explain. Turkey does a lot of things on their own. In this case, they're directly backing HTS, who is taking the fight to Bashar al-Assad because the Turks don't like the Syrians and the Syrians don't like the Turks. It goes back thousands of years. It's not really a new thing. But in any case, as we can see here, other power players that are at play are obviously ISIS. We've got dudes taking selfies of themselves as they're marching in. They are the moderate rebels, who are freedom and democracy and all kinds of great things that gets Congress to make them likable so we could send them even more money. Yeah, they're wearing ISIS patches. A lot of them are. So basically, it's the same old story in the Middle East. No one in America really cares about this sort of thing, but this is where your tax dollars are going right now. So apart from that, the other random groups that are kind of generally conglomerated underneath this sort of free Syrian army kind of approach, which is basically what the United States tried to create as an opponent, as a sort of independence movement within Syria, A lot of these groups just devolve into tribalism very quickly, so it's hard to say, like, are these guys really all about independence or not? I don't know. But another factor at play, again, here in the northeastern part of the city are the Kurds. Again, they are just a third faction on this big game board of risk, and that's how this works out. The Kurds have been backed by the U.S. at times, but also, left out to dry by the U.S. at times, so that relationship is very, very tenuous at best. So, I know, a lot of stuff nobody really cares about. So let's just go ahead and cut right to the chase here. Why does this matter? Well, let me tell you first what I think is happening. I'll just cut right to my assessment, and then you can agree or disagree. I think the CIA, who's largely running things in Western Syria, I think they understand the writings on the wall, and they're trying to give one last final push to oust Assad before Trump comes into office and realizes, wait a minute, we've been doing what in Syria? And, that kind of takes over. So over the years since Trump was in office, it turns out that all the people we spent fighting, all the people we spent a lot of lives and lost a lot of lives to fight in Syria, we're now helping because whatever reason, that's just how things worked out. I guess, again, like I said, anybody who opposes Assad, we throw cash at, and that's kind of the way that this has been. So personally, again, very inflammatory opinion, I know, but it shouldn't be surprising. I think the CIA or a lot of the OGA guys on the ground, they're trying to do one last push to do two things. One, because they know their jobs are on the line, and they know they're not going to be in Syria or they're going to have a reduced role in Syria. So they're doing one big push with these HTS guys to see if they can take Aleppo and just muddy the waters and make things as costly for Assad as they possibly can. And by doing so, they bring Russia into the conflict more directly. So now Russia is bombing random neighborhoods in Aleppo again. So it gets Russia all stirred up again. So that's kind of the way the CIA operates, right? They're just trying to get Russia to do something. But more nefariously, the other goal, which I think is, again, more contentious, more inflammatory, whatever, I think that the CIA is trying to destabilize Syria to the point to where a power vacuum or several power vacuums can occur. More terrorism in terms of what they can sell to the American people is created. Again, anytime someone is not in charge of a piece of land in the Middle East is exactly what happens here. A lot of bad dudes just spring up out of nowhere. This is exactly what Vladimir Putin said Turkey allowed, because Turkey created that safe zone in, I believe, Idlib, where it was basically just kind of a Syrian army will stay out of here, we'll leave each other alone. Well, guess what happened? Syria did that. They left these people alone, and now they're on their doorstep taking Aleppo. So again, power vacuums are a huge thing in Syria, and I think the CIA is trying to create a power vacuum to retroactively justify their own presence there. This is what the CIA does best, right? We're going to go in and we're going to poke the situation, make it worse, and then say, hey, look, see, we're needed here to fix this situation. So this really brings out the whole idea of chicken or the egg sort of thing. Was the situation made better or worse by the CIA being involved? Were they just there, just in the nick of time to stop bad guys from doing bad things? Or did they provoke those bad guys to do bad things who never planned to do bad things beforehand? It's sort of like the whole argument of, well, would 9/11 have happened if the FBI hadn't helped the hijackers? I don't know. It's definitely debatable. But in Syria, I think we can say with a little bit higher confidence that, the CIA is probably trying to stoke a power vacuum situation here. They're trying to make it as costly for Assad as humanly possible, because they know, or they can assess, that their funding is going to dry up, and all these, hundreds of millions of dollars we're funneling to, insurgent groups in the desert who don't have a favorable view of America, but as long as they hate Assad, they're good. I think that trend or that tactic's probably going to come to an end, or it's going to be reduced quite a bit. Will it ever end? I don't know. I mean, the CIA is going to do what the CIA is going to do regardless of who's in office, but I think that very long-winded, very conjecture-filled, very opinionated look at things in Syria is basically all I can muster for today in terms of what's actually going on there. Bottom line last, I guess, this may create the conditions for a very large Middle Eastern war again. another ISIS push. It could do this in a few months. We'll see. Again, it's hard to base an assessment that large on 2 days worth of fighting in Aleppo. Hard to say. I mean, I would say that just based on the two days of fighting, it's very unlikely for Assad to just kind of give up based off of that alone. I mean, the war was way more serious at one point, so why would it be more important now anyway? But this is setting conditions. This is setting conditions so that, you know, in a year from now, maybe you can look back on this and say, okay, I understand what he was trying to say now. Even if I can't articulate it very well right now. But either way, this could at some point, months or years from now, involve the United States getting dragged back into this. I hope not, but it could. Either way, somebody, somewhere is trying their hardest to make that happen. So either way, I guess we'll see how it works out. So, enough of that for today. Let's talk about the GhostNet. Again, I have nothing significant to report. I was on the GhostNet because it was Thanksgiving, so I was monitoring it. I didn't see that many news reports, but that's okay. I wasn't expecting there to be much traffic on it, but it's good. It's good that a lot of you were able to monitor it. I was not monitoring via my web SDR. I was on it via my personal radio here, so my reception wasn't so great just outside my local area. But I saw lots of heartbeats, lots of messages. It's good and fantastic that things are carrying on and going with this. So I'm glad to keep that going. I do have a couple of other quasi-secret projects in the works that are related to the GhostNet, but they're separate. So I'll be talking about those over the next couple of months, hopefully, once I get something ready for public consumption. But yeah, still working on things, still improving things. It's evolving. It's been around for over a year now, so I think that it's decently reliable at this point, which is good. So that's pretty much all I have for today. Again, I wish I was a little bit more coherent in terms of trying to figure out what I wanted to say today. But it's been kind of a long week. I'm a little bit tired, so please forgive me on that front. But yeah, these are the sources for today. Hopefully I'll be able to get a little bit more with regards to some of these events. I wish I had just more detail. I wish I had more to say on a lot of these incidents that are going on throughout Europe at least. So for now, this is what we've got. So we'll have to wait and see what next week brings. So thank you all for watching. Happy Thanksgiving, a belated happy Thanksgiving for all of you out there. I know that this year we have a lot to be thankful for. I most certainly do. So thank you to all of you out there for supporting me over the years. And I can't wait to see where this project goes in the future. So thank you again. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time. And as always, fight in the shade.